Okay, so the first question I really have to ask you, and I apologize if this sounds slightly blunt, but how does someone who comes from somewhere as beautiful as Ontario end up in England?
Oh man, you know what's funny is I've been obviously talking about my move over to the UK, and I've had so many British people like leaving comments like, you know, saying, hope you like overcast light and rain and blah, blah. But, I mean, I guess the biggest reason we're moving over here is this is where my wife's from. Right. And she had been living in Canada with me for about 10 years. So we met at West in Canada. She moved over, lived with me for about 10 years. And then we kind of just got to a point. We have a little one now, a little daughter, and I just want to be closer to her family and whatnot. So, decided to make the move over.
Honestly, I'm a big Toronto Maple Leaf fan, and I feel like you've made a terrible, terrible decision coming in this direction, but I'll leave that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan too. That's cool to hear. But I feel like I'm going to, you know, whenever I'm here, it's like games start at midnight, right?
Yeah. You have to have Premier Sports as well to watch it, which no one's heard of. So that's a bit frustrating. I think one of the first things I want to ask you about really is what makes you an advocate for film as opposed to digital? What's the draw? Because obviously with film photography, there's a lot more inconvenience and a lot less features. And what draws a lot of people towards the digital aspect of photography is the fact that you have so many sort of helping hands along the way from the cameras, many sort of assistances. Why do you prefer film?
Yeah, so I mean, I shot digital for the first 10 years of my career. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago that I made the switch to film almost exclusively, I guess. I actually recently bought a digital camera a couple months ago, Fuji, but up until that point, I hadn't owned one for about 3 years. But, you know, there's a couple things I think that appeal to me. You know, none of it by any means is like, I think it's better or anything like that. I think, you know, I think certain tools are going to appeal to different people in different ways. And for me, a big thing with film is I just really enjoy the process. It's kind of very tangible. You know, I enjoy the fact that you buy different film stocks and they have different looks and you load them into the camera and you can't really, you know, see the results until you send them away and get them developed. And it almost, you know, it almost makes me, give a lot more value to my images. And maybe that's because I'm shooting less, but whenever I shot digital, unless I was really being conscious of what I was doing, you know, it just felt like I always ended up with so many images and 95% of them I wouldn't do anything with. Whereas with film, you know, you have 10 or 12 or 24, depending on what camera format you're using, images per roll. So you're really, you know, making sure that whatever you're shooting is going to be something that you think you're going to be happy with. I mean, still, most of the time, you know, you only end up with a handful off a roll that are already good. But I would say those are kind of the big things that appeal to me. And then on the other side, the kind of gear side, it's super fun to just, you know, there's like this whole new world that opens up of all this equipment from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. These old quirky cameras, and they all just seem like they have so much soul. So a combination of the gear and the film choices, I would say, is what make up kind of my love for film.
What do you make of the resurgence of film? Obviously, it seems like over maybe the past 3 years, with a lot of YouTube accounts proliferating the ideas behind why it's a good idea to move into film. And you've got, I think Kodak are now having to up their prices to pay for the machinery that they're using to up the scale of their production because they've got such a demand all of a sudden. What do you make of that kind of resurgence?
I love it for sure. I think it's amazing. And I think it's just people should use whatever they enjoy. And if that's digital, that's great. Or if that's film, that's great. But, you know, obviously there's been a major appeal as, you know, this resurgence comes back and more people notice film and more people try it out. And obviously a lot of people are enjoying using it, which is amazing. So I think, you know, the more people that pick it up and get interested in it, you know, the more manufacturers start paying attention. And yeah, I mean, Kodak just released, you know, Ektachrome again, which is amazing. So I think it's catching a lot of people off guard, including the manufacturers themselves. You know, film was very much going downhill. You know, that's not to say that it's booming to the point that everyone is releasing new products, but it's certainly trending upwards. So yeah, I think it's amazing. The more people that get into it, the better, for sure.
Well, I feel like we're coming towards sort of a breaking point with the sort of technological revolution, where we keep, for maybe the last 40, 50 years, every time something new comes out, we instantly despise the old. And that's kind of led to a lot of things dying out, maybe that had their own charm and their own quirk, but people have just dismissed them out of hand because they're not the newest thing. And maybe now we're at a turning point where people are starting to see that there is benefits and there is joy to have from film photography, or from vinyl, or, you know, from old amplifiers if you're a guitar player or whatever. There's some joy to be found in not embracing just new technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what, like, we're definitely at a point, and we have been for a while now, where, you know, the technology that's available to us is by no means going to limit us in any way whatsoever. You know, you can pick up a digital camera for 5 years ago, and for the most part, it's going to do everything you need, you know, and unless it's like a special niche thing, right? Where you're like, say, I don't know, wildlife photographer, and you need the absolute latest and greatest autofocus or something. But from like a technology capability standpoint, you know, it's almost like all these new cameras that keep getting released, we kind of obsess over, and we kind of forget that the last version was more than capable enough. So, you know, I think with film, yeah, it's just kind of it's a throwback, and this kind of world opens up where there's all of this equipment, you know, that was at one time super expensive and really popular, and now it's available for a lot less than it used to cost, which is pretty exciting.
Well, I think that the majority of the driving force behind things being dismissed as not being good enough to do something is similar to how politics seems to be working and how most relationships now seem to work, which is that it's all based on online opinions of people that you don't know, that are anonymous, or are someone that you could learn next to nothing about. But people seem to take so much negativity so seriously and dismiss positivity when it's coming from someone and like, you know, that they don't know. I feel like the negativity drives a lot of the constant need for new cameras. It kind of, other people dismissing a camera that's 2 years old is a great opportunity for a manufacturer to take advantage of that mindset and to monetize that kind of, I don't want to be rude, but that kind of stupidity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and, you know, to that point, I mean, we're living in a time where we're exposed to more opinions and reviews and articles than we ever have been before, right? So yeah, it's so easy when something gets released or there's rumored to be released that like there's just this chatter about it and these opinions about it, and you can like go down the biggest rabbit hole trying to, you know, research certain things and whatnot, and then before you know it, it's easy to believe that that's what you need, right? And you forget that. Yeah. Whatever you have is probably still pretty damn good. So
kind of going down that path then, obviously for someone that's, I'd like to think that you're probably primarily known as an analog photographer. What was the draw towards YouTube, and what drives you to make videos for YouTube?
Yeah, so I have been a filmmaker and doing video production for as long as I've been doing photography. And I've run some production companies and stuff like that. So kind of my second passion has always been filmmaking and video. And, you know, I've also always really enjoyed, I guess you could say, teaching, just helping other people. Mm-hmm. And when I got back into film photography about 3 years ago, you know, there were all of these questions that I had, right? Just about like exposure and scanning and film types and all of these things. And I just figured, you know, I do enjoy making content as it is. So, you know, maybe I can make some videos that help people who have these same questions. Maybe I can help answer them now that I've, you know, done the research and experimented and tried to figure them out. So a lot of the videos that I started with were like, you know, film exposure tests and, you know, different camera views, but like purely from the standpoint of like, you know, this is how this works and this is what my experience is and this is why it's good for me. Never these like, in your face clickbaity, you know, the best film camera ever, the only one you ever, like none of that, purely just to like keep it authentic and, you know, try and help people and make it entertaining.
You've got to make sure that you put one of the words in your title in full caps so that everyone knows that you really mean it and they should definitely click.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, you know what, people are obviously, you know, can do whatever they want. but for me, I'm just like, this is me. This is, the content that I want to make and I feel is, most valuable. I want to make sure that whatever I'm putting out on my YouTube channel is something that's going to help someone, right? And isn't just like something I'm pushing out to try and get, another video up or people to click on it or whatever.
Well, I think that one of the downsides, or one of the interesting things about the democratization of photography, really in the sense of like YouTube putting out so many tutorials and so much information being out there, is the fact that there's a lot of bad information and there's a lot of information that's out there for the sake of it. So I've seen full tutorials that are, a 3-minute ad at the beginning, a 3-minute ad at the end, and then everything in the middle is just someone showing off to some flashy music, and there doesn't seem to be any substance to what they're doing. And it kind of makes me fear for newer photographers that, unless you have the ability to kind of sieve out the good stuff from quite a slurry of nonsense, it's quite hard to actually find the useful information on YouTube.
Well, I think like a lot of that can come from the way that people feel they need to approach YouTube, right? Let's say you're getting started in for the first time, right? And you're seeing what everyone else is doing. And there can be this pressure that like, oh, I need to get stuff out, right? And like, once you even build up, like I don't have a huge following by any means, but I think I'm close to 30,000. But once I got to about 10,000, I started having a lot of these companies approach me, third-party companies from overseas and stuff, saying like, we'll send you this light if you review it. We'll send you this. And like almost all of them I said no to because none of them fit with my channel. But I could see how a lot of people would be like, okay, I'll do that. And then they get this light and they, just turn it on and they make some review about it. So it's like, it's the biggest challenge I face is, having enough time to use something so I can actually make a video to give an opinion about it. Right. Yeah.
And one of my favorite things about your particularly your YouTube channel is the sparsity of videos. Like it's not a video every 5 minutes. That's just a video that's out for the sake of it. I think at the moment we're probably seeing a real glut of just nonsense videos where people are kind of stuck indoors and they're just trying to find something to do, or they're trying to retain an audience because, they feel like constant repetition is the way to retain their audience. With your channel, it feels like every video is quite considered. And I mean, what I definitely want to go down the route of is talking about your trip across America and just let you talk ad nauseum about that, because you basically lived out my dream of visiting all of these abandoned buildings and these amazing places. So I think we'll probably just go down that route.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So obviously you started off did you start off in Chicago?
No. So the most recent trip I did was just a little solo trip where I started. I basically drove from Toronto to New Mexico. But in terms of the big kind of year-long trip I did, that was back in 2017 is when we left. So basically, me and my wife, we kind of been wanting to make some changes for a while. I'd been running a video production company for a while, and I was kind of losing my passion in a way for like commercial work and stuff. So we actually ended up selling our house and pretty much everything that we owned. And we bought a truck and a trailer, and we just took off with it was me and my wife, and we had our dog with us. And we left kind of Toronto area in Ontario in Canada where we were living. And we basically drove across Canada all the way to the West Coast to Vancouver Island. And then we went down the West Coast into the States and into California, and then basically explored the desert and went along the southern coast over to Florida eventually, and then worked our way back home.
If I could jump in there, did you have much family? Do you have much family in Ontario?
Yeah. So that's where like my family is, and I have a brother and all our friends.
How did they feel about this?
I think a lot of people thought it was awesome. They were super supportive.
Cool. Yeah. Sorry, I just find it fascinating because obviously that distance that you drove is when you bear in mind I'm obviously English, that's like 3,000 times the length of England. So it's just it's crazy to think that was just like, we'll sell the house. We'll just drive what essentially is almost like a significant fraction of the world because it'll be cool. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. You know what? It was one of the best decisions that we've ever made, I think. And, we did space it out over, I think it was about 11 months. And we did 6 50,000 kilometers is what we ended up driving.
Jesus Christ.
We were just all over. But yeah, you know what? We just saved up and sold all our stuff, and we just said, whatever, let's go for it. And it really did turn out to be one of the best decisions ever. Just a lot came from it. That's where I discovered film photography again. I was actually really kind of at a low point with my photography, to the point where there were times where I thought about quitting just because I thought, maybe it wasn't for me anymore. I've been doing landscape photography for about 10 years and had a hard time accepting that I'd lost my passion for it. Mm-hmm. So it was on that trip that I kind of discovered film and discovered these new areas. And it kind of was like a launching point for everything I'm doing now. So
that's amazing. Honestly, everything that I've seen just looks like the way I'd want to live. I watched one of your videos last year and immediately booked a flight to. So I love Nevada. I love the desert in Nevada. So I basically go to Vegas and then travel out from there.
Amazing.
And yeah, I'm not saying I'm going to send you an invoice, but your videos did kind of cause me to book a plane trip.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's like Nevada and Arizona and stuff like that. That's probably my favorite area. It's just
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it's really underestimated as well, especially by Europeans that think that the only thing that's in Nevada is Vegas, and you go there, you drink, you gamble, you kill a hooker, and then you fly back. And there's actually so much to do when you travel out and you do something other than drink.
Well, what's funny is we for this massive trip, we didn't plan too much, but as we would get to certain areas, we'd be like, where do we want to go next? And I kept telling my wife, because I'd spent some time out in Arizona and Nevada and stuff, I said, we got to spend like a couple months out in this. And she just wanted to bypass it, right? But we ended up, we both agreed that those areas were by far our favorite from the entire trip.
So you're obviously doing photography and video work while you're there. What's your wife doing on this trip?
Just taking it easy and relaxing and reading and, walking the dog and exploring. And yeah, I'm naturally a busy person, you know what I mean? In terms of being like a creative. So for me, it wasn't a trip I could go on and just not do anything. And then when I discovered this new type of photography and film and started my YouTube channel, that kind of kept me busy. But it was still I'd been super busy with my video production and traveling a lot. So a big part of the trip was also hey, let's get away and spend some, quality time together and just go and explore. So it was still important to do that as well.
Were there any points where it got a bit, it got a bit too much, or was there any places that kind of just didn't do it for you and it made the trip kind of sour for a little while?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it ever got sour for a while, but there were definitely times where, we're living in a 20-foot trailer, right, with our dog and all of our stuff. And there were times where you're like, okay, it would be cool to have a house and Wi-Fi again, or a little more space. But at the same time, we would get to areas and there'd be no cell phone service, right? Yeah. And we're like, shit, this is weird. But then we would go to a thrift store and buy a book and read for 8 hours. So it was just a really good check, a reality check to get back to some of the things that are really important. And then, we enjoyed most places we went, but there were some places we would go and stay where you're driving around at 10 at night, trying to find a place to park to sleep, and some sketchy experiences in certain areas and stuff. So, yeah, but all part of the adventure.
So a lot of the work that you did that I've seen on YouTube, and obviously the prints that are available on your site and whatnot, are based around abandoned buildings and old Americana, and kind of the history of the places that you were in. Has it dawned on you yet that you've moved to a country that basically doesn't really have any abandoned buildings because we're too small to have them?
Oh, it's funny. I've been out, obviously right now we're on lockdown and whatnot, but we get our one walk a day. So I've been just going out with the camera and shooting a little bit. But I was joking the other day that I walked around this town for 3 days. I didn't see one car that was older than 5 years.
Yep.
But no, in saying that, the work that I've been doing for the past 3 years has been a specific portfolio, which is all the American Southwest. And, I was really feeling that I was at a point where it was time to kind of wrap it up. Yeah. And I could keep going to those areas and photographing for the rest of my life. But I could kind of start to feel things getting very similar. So in a way, it's like, this total reset, going somewhere that's completely different and has a completely different look. I think is a good thing. It's going to be a challenge, but like a really good one. So once obviously all this pandemic stuff settles down, whenever that is, I'm really excited to go and explore. I've been over here to the UK a number of times just with my wife being from here, but whenever we come, we're just hanging with family and trying to catch up and stuff like that. So I've never really gone and, drove north and explored or whatnot. So.
Well, you're getting the full British experience at the moment, because basically you're spending all your time indoors looking out the window, annoyed at anyone that walks past your house. So that's pretty much what being British is all about.
Well, it's good to know. I guess I'm getting my fix here.
So do you have any projects in mind for sort of representing your time in England, or is it just a case of kind of letting things organically flow?
Yeah, definitely organically. I'm at a point right now where I'm just, I picked up a couple different cameras and a couple different film stocks, and I'm just going out and purely just being curious and shooting. And, once I have the ability to kind of travel a little bit here, I'm going to start, doing some research on areas and potential stories and subjects and stuff like that. But, the one thing I learned from the work that I'm doing right now is, I discovered it very authentically, and it just felt right when I finally found it. Yeah. And I think that's really important. So, I'm going to maybe it takes me 6 months, maybe it takes me a year to really find what that next focus is. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to, go and travel and explore and see what I find and see what catches my attention.
So who was it that first influenced you to pick up a camera?
Oh, geez. You know what? I would say probably no one in particular. It's hard to say where the influence really came from. When I was living out west in Canada, I was about 19. I just moved out to the mountains to snowboard and stuff like that for a year after I got out of school. And that's where I bought my first camera. But you know what? I can't really remember why. I've always been like very interested in arts and, very kind of a very visual person. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what kicked it off. But there was never, I never saw someone's work and was like, oh, I want to be a photographer kind of thing.
Did that moment ever come?
No. I mean, obviously, as I got more consumed with photography, there are tons of influences over the years and all sorts of people who I looked up to. And I mean, there still is today. I'm constantly super impressed by so many people's work. But yeah, there was never like one moment where I saw something and it was like, that's what I want to do kind of thing.
Do you remember like a time, do you have like a moment in your life where you remember like you became a photographer as opposed to just someone that took photos?
Not really, because I think like everyone else, even to this day, there's still like part of me that feels like an imposter, where I'm like, should I really be talking about this? Do I know what I'm doing? Even though I've been doing it for 13 or 14 years or whatever. But it's kind of just like, it's what I love doing and it's what I consume myself with. And, every day I kind of stop and I'm like, yeah, I'm still doing it. And I still love it kind of thing.
Yeah. I see you're a contributor for, is it Offbeat?
Yes. Yeah.
So what is Offbeat?
So Offbeat is a company that's run by two Canadian photographers, Dave Broche and Paul Ziska. Paul is this amazing landscape photographer out in Western Canada. And he does a lot of like night photography and just really, really cool stuff. And Dave Broche is this kind of, he refers to himself as like a generalist. So he's like an amazing portrait photographer, landscape photographer, but they started this company as like a learning resource, essentially. So they host workshops all over the world, taking people all over the place. And then they also have this community Facebook group where they teach all sorts of stuff. So on top of that, they have like contributors. So I think there's 6 or 7 of us. And, we write articles and go to workshops and that kind of stuff.
Oh, amazing. And you basically just... to think that you're a contributor obviously makes me think I need to start checking out some of the other photographers that are involved for definite. One thing I wanted to ask you about, obviously I'm trying to avoid the subject because I think a lot of people at the moment are kind of sick of talking about it, but I think you probably have quite an interesting perspective. What's going on at the moment? What do you make of this pandemic and the sort of media outcry and just, it's obviously an unprecedented time. How are you kind of absorbing it all, especially being in a relatively new country?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like for many of us, it's been kind of every day you still have to sit there, and it's a little surprising still that something like this is going on. But for me, it's been very interesting because I'm in the process of getting my visa over here. So I was actually here. My wife moved over in December. I came and visited and left on the 15th of March.
Yep.
So I flew back to Canada, and then I got home and they started canceling international flights. So I went home, went into my office for a day, booked a ticket back that night at midnight, and got back on a plane with like a backpack full of stuff. So
wow,
I've been here ever since, just with like, I got a little bit of camera gear and whatnot, but we're basically just waiting it out. I want to be with my family, but yeah, I mean, it's a really, really interesting time. And, for me, it's really important to me, even before something like this happened. I don't pay too much attention to media outlets, and I'm very conscious of what I consume in terms of what goes into my head. And I think this time right now, that is more apparent than ever in terms of how it can affect you. Yeah. So, I'm kind of like, once a day I'll go on one of their news websites that I trust, and I'll just get my update, and that's it. But man, you could sit and read and listen for, 15 hours a day if you want. And I think that can make things a lot worse than they are. Not to say that, it's not a really serious time, but, I think there's a lot of, there's still a lot of good things that are going on. Right?
There's such a thing as blissful ignorance. And I think as well, where you come from, North America, not to, throw stones here, because our media is possibly one of the worst in the world, but North America media, I mean, especially America, but the time I've spent in Canada has not been too dissimilar. There is just a depression about, like, it's just an onslaught of bad information and sadness and anger and constantly trying to create outrage. And it's not healthy for people. No. And what's funny is like, I keep telling people my favorite thing on Facebook lately has been the snooze button. So you can basically snooze someone for 30 days. And honestly, over the past couple of weeks, whenever someone posts something about statistics or this terrible thing or that terrible thing, it's like they get snoozed. And it's not me trying to like avoid reality, but I equate it to honestly having someone follow me around all day and be like, have you heard of coronavirus? It's this awful thing that's happening and all these people are dying. And it's just like, I get it. I'm doing, trying to do my best and doing what is recommended, but I don't need to be reminded, 55 times a day that about this. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's. I've been a little bit more surgical, and I've just literally been cutting people completely out of social media that do it because, like you say, it's like having someone just stand there and just scream something at you that you already know you don't need an update on. And if you did, you wouldn't go to them for it.
Totally. Yeah. But it's funny though, because then with everything that's going on, and, obviously right now in the UK, we're being told to, stay inside with our immediate family. You can go out once a day. Right. Mm-hmm. But, I'm like, while I'm here, I can go for a walk a day. I'm shooting photos. I'm spending time with my family. We're cooking together. We're hanging out. The weather's been great. Like it's, there's still a lot of things to be, to be like happy about and grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a bizarre situation because in some instances it's feels like nothing's going on because you're kind of bored and you're trying to find ways to fill the time. But in other ways, it's this huge world issue that's obviously incredibly terrifying, and there are people dying of it and there are people having to put themselves at risk to help. And it just feels like a really bizarre time because it almost feels like there's a world war going on, but it's just like the other side of town and you don't have to worry about it, but you might have to worry about it, but you don't know if you have to worry about it.
Yeah. No, it's like, and again, I'm not trying to downplay the situation by any means. It's very serious. It's just, I think you just really have to be like very proactive and in terms of like how you approach your day and what you consume and how much you read about and what you decide to focus on and stuff like that. One of the things that I am working on today is I've been trying to think of like how I can help in some way, right? Because like even going out to like the grocery store, right? You see these people who have to go to work every day there, right? And you don't realize how important that is and how much of a risk it is, right? So it's like, I really commend people like that. So I'm thinking about, or I'm trying to put together like a fundraiser, selling some prints and stuff, and then see if I can donate the money somewhere.
That's really nice.
Try and feel like I can do something, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of those things I actually feel, obviously. So my wife works in care and she runs a care home for the council. She has a load of high risk residents and also amazing staff that every day are putting themselves at risk, but are still braving it, and providing the necessary things for people that are not only at risk of coronavirus but are just vulnerable in general. And I'm sat at home and I'm a wedding photographer and a portrait photographer, and I've never felt more absolutely useless in my life. So I've started to put together ways in which I could probably make some money, and then put that towards the people at her work having a nice party, or paying off some bills or whatever I can do to help. It's really weird, but it's weird to feel so useless. I'm aware that obviously a photographer is it's a weird superfluous thing, but it's also very important in a historical sense. But yeah, it's weird to feel so useless at the moment.
Well, you know what? I think this is a good reality check or reminder as well. I think when we're just living in our day-to-day life and everything's going normal, society obsesses and is consumed by a lot of things that don't really matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People and celebrities and this and that. And then it's we get into a pandemic like this and it's we start paying attention to a lot of the people who maybe you wouldn't think about in that specific way, right?
Yeah, I've enjoyed the celebrities that have tried to kind of draw attention to themselves through Twitter or whatever, and then just been knocked down. I've really enjoyed that, where people have just normally, it's fun to be entertained by you, but right now is not the time. It's almost like celebrities are being treated like a toddler that hasn't gone to bed yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's. And I'm not, trying to knock anyone or anything, but I just think it's a real stuff like this is healthy in a way as a reminder for us to, kind of shift our focus and our way of thinking a little bit.
Absolutely.
So yeah, in a way, that's another thing I guess you could take away from this.
How are things back in Canada?
Yeah, so it's hard to know, to be honest. Right. All I know is that basically I got home. And then the next day after I got home is when the government put in place a mandatory 14-day quarantine if you got back from traveling anywhere, regardless if you had symptoms or not. Mm-hmm. And then I left the next day over here, and then just did that when I got here, just to try and be as safe as I could. But yeah, so. That's all I really know. I've talked to family a little bit. It seems like Canada might be a little bit behind the UK in terms of, what they're doing, but I would say not too far behind at all.
Yeah, it's. I've seen Trudeau doing some press conferences to talk about what they're doing and how they're going to try and combat it. It's crazy. It's a crazy time to be about. Yeah,
and the last thing that people are so opinionated during times like these as well, and I'm just it's a crazy time and no one's experienced this shit before ever,
Yeah, but there's always an expert though. Even if it's the first time something's happened, there's always someone that's decided that they're an expert.
Well, yeah, man. Well, I'm just everyone is trying their best to figure this out and make the best decisions possible. You know what I mean? World leaders, leaders of different countries, this and that. So it's I give a lot of respect to people who are really, really consumed with some difficult decisions right now.
It is fascinating to me to watch people use something like this as leverage in an argument, a political argument. It's just not the time, Let's just kind of focus on what's important. Let's get everyone healthy. Let's get the country back up and running. Let's get the world back up and running. And then you can go back to your stupid arguments in comment sections where you're never going to convince anyone but yourself.
Yeah. It's you got to push all differences aside right now.
Exactly. So let's move away from Corona. Let's not talk about that anymore. A couple of things I did want to ask you, if possible, is just one thing I want to try and do with the podcast is have people introduced to some new photographers or some new art or some new movies or anything to kind of occupy the mind and give them something new to check out. Whose work are you enjoying in terms of photography at the moment? Or are there any movies that you've watched that have really spoken to you recently?
Tiger Man on Netflix or Tiger King.
Yeah, Tiger King.
No, I say that as a joke. Obviously, everyone's.
It's the meme at the moment, right?
Yeah. I would. You know what is really interesting, and one of the things that I love about social media. Social media gets a lot of hate at times. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like to kind of shit talk it and complain about it and stuff, but. it's like daily I'm introduced to people's work, just if I come across it or if it's, recommended by someone else. And just so it has a huge influence on what I do. And then even just being able to connect with people, like, you did a podcast, you mentioned me in it, you tagged me in an Instagram post, and then I heard it and was able to connect with you. So it's an amazing way to just, meet a bunch of people and build a bunch of relationships that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I would say that, there isn't one specific person whose work stands out to me right now, but I would say that, a ton of people who I follow on Instagram, their work plays a huge role in terms of, my inspiration and my direction and my style and stuff like that. And most of the people I follow would be film photographers with similar kind of subject matter to what I'm shooting.
Yeah. One thing I would ask you, actually, I meant to ask you fairly early on, but it slipped my mind. How do you describe yourself as a photographer? What's your genre?
So, what I've struggled with this for a bit. Obviously, when I did, before I was a landscape photographer, it was very simple. I shot wilderness and nature and stuff, but, this work is almost that in a way, in terms of, obviously the subject matter isn't the wilderness, but it's these environments. So I almost just call myself a contemporary landscape photographer, because I think the style of work I'm doing still very much is landscape, even though that includes towns and cars and objects and stuff like that. Yeah.
So what's the one thing you're looking forward to doing when you're allowed back out of your house?
Oh, I would say exploring. So like I said before, I'm right now I'm based in just outside of Reading. And most of my time, whenever I've come to visit in the UK, has been just in this area with family and stuff. So, for so long now, I've been looking at maps and looking at, going north in the UK.
Yeah.
So one of the things, once I get moved over here and the rest of our stuff sorted out, is I'm going to buy a camper van.
Yeah.
And just, drive and explore.
Amazing.
See where that takes me.
I'm actually really fascinated to see what you do with England, because obviously I think Americana and the Midwest, it all has its own aesthetic, and you've done an amazing job of framing it. And something I'm going to have to talk to you about at some point is I'm going to pick up some of your prints, because they're some of my favorite work. But with England, I find England an incredibly difficult place to photograph, and I'm interested to see what you do with it.
Yeah, I'm interested as well. For me, obviously you're from here, and I know for me, the area that I was living in Canada, started to become very, not necessarily boring, but just repetitive. And
you get numb to it, right?
Big time. Yeah. And I think that's why the work that I'm doing now, or the Southwest stuff, is such an appeal to me, because it was, these desert landscapes, it was such a different color palette and subject matter. So here in the UK, that feels very similar to me as well. So I think it all depends. I think, like you said, you can get numb to places pretty easily, but there's no doubt it's going to be a major shift visually. And one of the fun things I'm doing right now is just, playing around with different film stocks and going in and shooting, and, just getting a feel for what works with the kind of palette around here.
So is it a case of do you find the film that works with the environment?
Yeah, basically all of my work for this Southwest series was shot on Kodak Portra 400.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, a big reason why that film worked so well is because the palette out there is a lot of blues and browns and oranges. So these really nice complementary colors. And then the Portra 400 kind of shifts blue to a little teal or cyan. So it just worked really well for that environment. But now that I'm over here, I'm like, what could work well with, say, greens, right? So I'm trying out some different Fuji stocks and stuff like that. And again, that's, going back to that question about why I love film photography, and that, that's definitely one of the things.
Yeah.
Just experimenting and playing around with stuff like that.
So I just want to finish up by saying I'm so thankful that you agreed to do this. You are one of my favorite photographers in the world. What I try and do at the end of every episode is everyone needs to know where they can find all of your amazing work. So please plug away at your website and social media.
Cool. Yeah, no. And I mean, thank you for reaching out. Like I said, it was really cool to do this. People want to find me. Instagram is where I post almost daily. So that's kind of the place to see my most current work. My Instagram handle is Kyle__ McDougall with 2 L's. Kyle _ McDougall was taken. So, and then my website is kylemcdougallphoto.com. And then if you just Google my name on YouTube, you'll find my,
I'm gonna link your YouTube a lot. I'm actually writing a social distancing blog today about your YouTube, so don't worry about that.
Oh, sweet. Amazing.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It's been amazing to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Sensing the smile, the smile, the smile, the smile.